Hi, Yola. Good to see you.
Thank you. Super excited.
Grand. Okay, well, over to you. Tell us about diversity in hiring.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen now. Great. Looks like you can all see it. Super excited to see here. I'm actually in a Shopify office today, which is not normal for us because we work remotely now. So this is a bit different than usual. I'm going to talk about effective and inclusive hiring process. So short about my experience, early in my career, I got an opportunity to build a team of 40 engineers, with about 35% of them identifying as women. And that was at Pollen, which is a tech startup primarily based in UK. Since then, I also taught interviewing skills to about hundreds of engineers at Onfido, and now get an opportunity to witness this massive hiring program at scale at Shopify, which obviously has some lessons on its own. So I'm going to use all that experience to tell you about how to hire better. Firstly, when I talk about inclusivity here, what I really mean is giving you the biggest chance to fill your open roles with the best candidates out there, no matter what their gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, past experience, or education. You need the best people in your roles, and you're likely to get them. You're likely not getting them today, as they're either never showing up in your pipeline or never successfully going through it. So if you're 90% of our industry, you might be missing out on all those people who don't quite fit the usual narrative. And we'll talk through your hiring pipeline in those 3 stages, starting at the very top. And we're going to start with talking about how you can expand your pool of candidates and set up your process so it does surface the best out of the available pool. So step 1, grow the pool of your candidates. Based on my experience so far, that is perhaps where it's that's the hardest stage, because how much time you or your team spends here will directly affect the results. Over time, there's a few practices that I found useful. Michal was just talking about sourcing candidates, and there were some questions in the chat about whether you should source yourself or not. Obviously, that will really depend on your environment, but as an engineering leader, I find that directly reaching out to candidates who are not common in my pipeline in a very genuine, authentic, and personal way, so optimizing for quality of those reach outs rather than quantity of those reach outs, is super, super important. You have so much direct influence over this step. And it really disproportionately affects the diversity of the pipeline. Even today, actually, just a couple of hours ago, I got information that we placed a candidate who was a woman into my team, and that was because I reached out to her 2 months ago. The way I do this, I spend time on this myself, but I time box it. So I spend an hour every week. There's a scheduled time in my calendar as any other meeting, and I expect all of the managers reporting to me to do the same. At work, we also had really good results through organizing dedicated sourcing parties and training our team on how to use LinkedIn, how to reach out to people, and getting everyone involved into sourcing together, or making that part of expectations for performance as well, as we believe that building the team is part of everyone's job at work. There is a shortcut here. If you don't have time, there is a lot of sphere of companies that are specialized in and spend the time and put in the work into building trustworthy networks of diverse candidates in those communities. So if you don't have the time and you don't want to spend your time on sourcing, this is a great shortcut that you can go through that will meaningfully impact the front of your pipeline. But then a chance might have it that when you're writing your job description, you're getting inspired by a bunch of ones that you found on the internet, and there's probably a high chance that they've been inspired by other ones, and they've just been all copied and validated and modified from someone else over and over again. So what I would encourage you to do here, there's a few principles that I take into account now when writing a job description, which is, rather than asking for specific skills or characteristics, just describe the actual activities or objectives this person will be doing in their job. As an example, rather than saying that you need 5 years of experience in React or open source contributions to GraphQL, just say that in this role, you'll be building a React Native application that's powering the point of sale app for Shopify, used by millions of users every month. That way, you're not describing someone's specific career path, specific life path they went through, but describing what they're going to have to do on the job and letting them self-select into whether they think they can meet those expectations or not. And that way, you basically don't look for a specific model of a person you're looking for, can they do your job? Which I generally just think is much more effective, because there's a bunch of studies about how women only apply if they meet 100% of your checkboxes on your job description, and men will apply if they meet half of them. So that's something to take into account. Secondly, avoid gender language. And that's not just like inclusive pronouns, so rather than saying, he, say them, but also make the job more balanced by avoiding languages that come across as competitive or aggressive. And there's plenty of like online language checkers that can easily point those out for you now. So those three things, hopefully you're in a place where you've activated a bunch of those people who otherwise would never even apply or never end up in your pipeline. And let's focus on what to do next, which is you want to ensure that your hiring process actually supports you selecting the best candidates out there. Before we go into like how you screen, we'll focus on how to set up your candidate for success. So not everyone interviews well. And actually, if you're looking for software engineers, interviewing is likely not a skill that they are very familiar with when it comes to practicing it every day. And what you're looking for when it comes to like a core skill of a developer is them being able to solve complex problems and build reliable systems. That's not necessarily the same thing as interviewing. So my biggest point here is that you want to make sure that you don't that your candidates' interviewing skills don't get in the way of you learning about what their programming skills are like. And there's a couple of things that I want to point out here that might be helpful. Firstly, I think you can be more transparent about the interview process with your candidate. Letting people prepare in order to show you their truly like best side of themselves is not really going to harm your process or let people cheat. You're actually going to end up having like much richer conversations about topics you and your software engineers care about. That will also have like the side effect of helping candidates that may have like a stage fright or just be really nervous about like what's going on and the unexpectedness of an interview, to tame that stress a little bit. And through that, they will perform much better. So it's all about minimizing stress. Letting people know what's coming is one way to help that. But you could also help candidates minimize it by letting them choose the interview at preferred times, with the preferred breaks in the middle of like a long stack of interviews. Or if you're doing a system design interview, even letting them choose a preferred tool that they're going to use to like draw those boxes in could go a really long way. Lastly, don't forget about providing some like easy accessible accommodations. A good examples I've seen before is a candidate who stuttered. They may need slightly more interview time than others. And there's plenty of ways where you can find super easy accommodations that you can provide that will make for a better candidate experience. And I think the best way here is to just ask people like, how can we set you up for success? Like, how can we make sure you show us your best skills in this interview? So now you're confident, you're getting the best out of every candidate, and you've got the best candidates into your pool. It's time to figure out how to determine who is the best for your job. This is quite similar to the point that I was making about job descriptions and making them inclusive. Because at this point, you're hiring people to do an actual job with an actual objectives. You know what those are, you've written them down. So the entire goal of screening is to verify if they can do those things well in an environment that's similar to yours. When I say similar to yours, that means that a job of a software engineer at a 3-people startup is going to be super different to a software engineer at a 12,000 people tech company. So you want to make sure you take that into account as well and look for those actual skills they're going to be using day to day. And most importantly, don't screen for a proxy of skills. So what I mean by that is you don't want to like, if you are looking for someone who's going to be writing a web application every day, you want to know whether they can design a system that will solve your user's problem. And testing for whether they can solve this arbitrary algorithm is not necessarily going to give you that. So that's one point here. But then once you have those questions, you have to find a way to use objective criteria to determine what the success looks like. That does sadly mean you need to not just design the questions and think of those, but also have a long, hard think about what you want to hear as answers. I generally tend to go with less questions than more. Like these days, I settle on 4 questions in an interview that we go sort of deep on and try to expand as much as possible. And that lets you like really well measure the depth of how complex they can go. But in any way, you have to predetermine what an amazing and good enough and not good enough answer looks like. And make sure you have a system, like a scorecard in place to ensure that all interviewers are able to apply that objectively. One additional thing here I do is when talking to interviewers about, how this experience with that person was, when they say like, oh, this person is very experienced, you have to ask them like, how do you know this? And I encourage interviewers to take loads of notes, ideally with quotes, so they can then recall specific examples of things that person has mentioned that made them arrive on this person is great judgment. Because I think it's a lot harder to be subjective when you have to support your feelings with facts and quotes and things you've actually heard and examples that you were given in an interview. Lastly, control for biases. All of us have them, and they really influence how we approach people we meet. With some, you will get along great and you'll find the interview super easy, the conversation will flow. With others, you may find it really hard to make a connection. There are 2 practical tips that I tend to teach all interviewers. Firstly, just before the interview, like 5 minutes before, read the list of most common interview biases. Just like, find on the internet and get them on the top of your mind. And this allows you to a lot more easily spot yourself applying them throughout the interview. Secondly, after the first 5 minutes of an interview, do like a little gut check with yourself on like, what do you think of this candidate? 5 minutes in, are they great? Are you feeling great? Are you excited for this interview? Or are you not feeling like it's going super well? And then act the opposite of your feeling. So if you're feeling very positive, make sure you're staying strict to the questions and the criteria you have. If you're feeling negative, try and engage with the interviewer as much as possible and ensure you're setting them up for success in the interview. That controls like for the biggest bias of like we tend to go easy on people we like and we tend to go harder on people we don't like. So doing this like fairly small trick will allow you to control for a lot of the biases that get in the way of you determining who is the best. At the end of the day, I'm super confident by putting in a little bit more thought into designing like an end-to-end hiring experience that's super intentional. You'll be able to build a team composed of people who otherwise wouldn't even be on your radar. Because all you have to do is find the best candidates for your job, right? And you don't want those biases, you don't want your job description that's not written in the best way, or anything else that gets in the way from preventing you to reach people who otherwise wouldn't show up in your pipeline. Thanks for having me, and you can find more about this on my Twitter.
Thanks so much, Ola. That was brilliant. And very, very important topic, obviously. We need to do a lot more in terms of the process of hiring, I think, and the inclusivity of how we approach it. But yeah, very, very important. Thanks very much.